Welcome to our Introduction to ST walkthrough video. Today we will cover the steps to create a criteria file, demonstrate the ST summary analysis, and take a look at the final output report and graphs. To open ST, from the navigation bar select Summary Across Trials, or also under the File menu, select Summary Across Trials. So we'll toggle over to the ST portion of the program, and we first see our wizard here. I haven't opened any recently, but otherwise your recent criteria would show up here in the list. But we will just create a new criteria, which can be performed right here. Or if we didn't have that pop up, we can also do that from the File menu and the New Criteria. And so basically a criteria is a question. It's going to pull in trials that we want to study, bring in treatments that we're interested in, and then the assessment data in all of those trials. And so we are posing different questions about how we want to view the data and how we want to analyze things, and that essentially is what we're forming here with a criteria file, and it gets saved the same as a trial file or protocol file in ARM. It's kind of its separate file that is saved and changed and manipulated as we go. So here, this first step, we're just setting the study definition. It should match what most of your trials are that you use. So we'll just use the standard GDM def and the GAL definitions. So now there's really three main parts of a criteria. And this first one here is selecting the trials to search. And so I will click this button here to display our study list, where we can find all of the studies we want to bring together to look at today. I've got my tutorial checklist on, and we will use the ST example studies. So I will just filter for those studies that all came from the same ST exam protocol. And then I'll just select all of those. And then click OK. And so now in parentheses here we have 6, kind of our visual indication that we have 6 studies that we're looking at and have been chosen. Here's some settings here. I usually just skip this part, and we can always come back here. It'll be available in the criteria too. So then the next part of a criteria is to define the treatments that we want to look at. And so ST can look across all of those trials that we had selected and build a list of treatments. So any distinct treatment that it can find across all of those studies, it can put in one big list for us. Otherwise, if we had specific set that specific group of treatments that were already just defined in a given protocol or trial, we could take just those, and then ST would prompt us for a file. But I think the build is the most powerful feature here. And in this case, all of our ST example studies all came from the same protocol. They all have the same treatment list, so it's pretty straightforward. But if you did have studies with many different kinds of treatments, you could use the build treatments to get a big list of everything, and then kind of cut those down to the ones that you're interested in. So we'll go next here, and basically this will define what fields we want to look at to consider treatments to be the same or different. So by default, treatment name, if the treatment name differs, obviously it's a different treatment. Also, if the rate and rate unit are different, then we would want to consider those as separate. So if we did have the same product at several different rates, and we want each of those different rates to be separate in our list, then we would keep those on, which is what we'll do here. We get another chance to select the trials to search if we wanted only a subsection. but here we'll just take those same 6 to build. Now ARM read all of those files, and it kind of gives us a summary here. It found 4 treatments. All 4 were in that first study, but they checked the other studies too and didn't find any other ones to add. So now we're here in the treatments editor. That looks very similar to what we see in ARM. And so we found 4 treatments, and they were all in all of those studies. As I said, we have a pretty standard, simple example here. And the slightly darker gray columns here in treatment name, rate, and unit just kind of remind us that that's what we chose for our matching. So then the third portion of a criteria that we would need, now that we have the studies to choose and the treatments that we're looking at, now we need to define what to do with the assessment columns. And so we do that by going to the assessment data editor over here under the navigation bar. So I'm just going to click into a column here. And so we have a couple of different wildcards you see kind of get filled in here. And those are pretty important in ST. The first one is the asterisk. And so that's kind of a give me everything. Don't even match. So basically we're kind of trying to just tell ST what to do with the different assessment columns across all of the trials. I think of it as kind of a big old pile of all of the columns and all of the trials kind of get put together, and then here we're kind of telling ST how to sort them. We want to sort them into different groups. Maybe we toss some out. We're only interested in particular columns. How do we do that, and how do we tell ST how to do that? So the asterisk is going to say we don't care about pest type. Whatever you have for a pest type, just give me them all. They're all the same to me. So the at wildcard is our match and separate. So basically what this will do is have ST look across all of the different pest codes in all of the assessment columns and put them into separate piles for each different pest code it finds. So that way, really we wouldn't want to combine different columns that are looking at different pests. We would really want to combine all of one pest and then separately look at all of a different pest. Or kind of the same thing here with the crop code and the crop name is, if we have yield data on corn in one trial, yield data on soybeans in another one, it's not really going to make much sense to pool those data together and give us one mean. That's not really going to make sense to us. So we'd much rather look at just all of the corn studies, or all of the corn columns for that matter, and then look at all the soybeans separate in its own section. We can also do a direct match. Then we can tell it specifically, instead of just sorting out all of our columns, let's throw out some. Let's only focus in on particular columns. So for example, we can, in our rating type, I'm going to click on this gold box for our filter. And so this is going to show across all of those studies and treatments we've picked. These are the assessment columns. These are the rating types from all those assessment columns. And so we have 4 of them listed here. Maybe we're only kind of interested in anything with our control. And so I'm just going to pick control and click OK. And so now ST is going to throw out any assessment column that doesn't have a rating type of control. And then we'll separate the rating units. So if we are doing a little bit different type of rating with the control, we would have them separated out so we don't just blindly include everything together. And we still can bring up the validation list here to see all of the choices possible, but it may not make sense to choose something from here if there are no such columns in our studies. So it's kind of helpful to maybe see the description of what we chose in the control, but using the sorted list here of actually what we have in the studies is much easier to choose from. And we could also choose several of these if we want to consider them the same. So maybe somebody had used the full code, control, and maybe somebody else had just typed in the word control instead. And so that would be a way to combine those together into one, even though they weren't actually entered the same. In this case, we don't have that. We had standard headers, so we don't have to do that. And so for now, well, I'm just going to clear the criteria here. What you can also do, instead of using the wildcards on the ST properties panel, you can also do some of those actions. So here is the @ symbol, the start of field with different items in separate summary columns is what that symbol is going to do, but we could just say don't match this field. And now it changed it from the @ to an asterisk instead. So if it makes more sense for that language to run through instead of using this code and the wildcards, that will accomplish the same thing.